When the Volson arrived at Ruusan, Bane was surprised to find both Sith and Jedi fleets in the system. The Sith had formed a blockade around the planet, obviously trying to prevent the Jedi from bringing reinforcements to their fellows on the surface. Yet to Bane's eye, it appeared that the Jedi were making no effort to run the blockade. Their ships seemed content to wait, lurking just beyond the range of enemy fire. And the Sith couldn't attack without breaking formation and exposing their lines. The result was a tense stalemate, with neither side willing to make the first move. Despite the blockade, Bane was able to land his ship on Ruusan without drawing the attention of either fleet. The Jedi weren't concerned with ships going to the planet, and the Sith were patrolling in patterns designed to guard against large-scale incursions. The blockade was meant to stop troop transports, supply ships, and their escorts. It was all but useless against a single scout vessel or fighter. His sensors picked up the Sith encampment soon after he breached the atmosphere, and he brought the Volson in on the far side of the world. The blockade patrols hadn't spotted him, and he'd disabled the ship's beacon before leaving Lehon. Nobody knew he was here. He planned to keep it that way for a while longer. He set the ship down in the cover of a small range of foothills several kilometers from the encampment. He would draw less attention approaching on foot, and he wanted to keep the Volson's location secret in case he needed it to make a quick escape. He disembarked and began the long hike to meet up with Kaan and his fellow Sith. It was hard to tell who had won. Bodies clad in the garb of each side were everywhere, intermingled, as if the combatants had remained locked together in hatred long after they'd all been slain. The human man was not quite dead, though the gaping wound in his gut gave stark evidence that he wouldn't live to see the night. He wore the robes of the Sith, and the shattered remains of a lightsaber's hilt lay near his outstretched hand. Bane recognized him as one of the lesser students from the academy on Korriban. So weak in the dark side, it wasn't even worth the bother of learning his name. Yet he knew Bane. With a groan, the man rolled onto his back and hauled himself up to a sitting position, leaning his head and shoulders against the nearby stone. His eyes, glazed and dilated, cleared momentarily and came into focus.
"Lord Bane," he gasped. "Kaan told us you were dead."
There was no point in replying, so Bane said nothing.
"You missed the fight,"
the man mumbled, the words hard to hear through the choking bubbles of blood welling up in his throat. A coughing fit cut off what he was going to say next. He was too weak to even bring up his hand to cover his mouth as he spewed red spots over Bane's dark boots.
"The battle was glorious,"
he finally croaked out.
"It's an honor to fall in such a splendid battle."
Bane laughed loudly, the only appropriate response to such ridiculous stupidity. "Glory means nothing for the dead," he said, though it wasn't clear if the man could even hear him in his fevered state. He turned to go, then paused when he felt a feeble tug on his heel.
"Help me, Lord Bane."
Lifting his boot free of the clutching hand, Bane answered, "My name is Darth Bane." There was a sickening crunch as his boot slammed down, grinding the man's skull into the rocks, propping him up. His body convulsed once, then lay still. The purging of the Sith had begun. "Our spies indicate Hoth's main camp is located here," he said, jabbing a finger at a heavily wooded section of the map. "If we can flush them out of the forest, we might be able to." He stopped short as a dark shadow fell across the map. "What now?" he demanded, pounding his fist on the table and snapping his head up to find the cause of this latest interruption. An enormous mountain of a man stood in the doorway, blocking the light streaming in from outside. He was tall and completely bald, with a heavy brow and hard, unforgiving features. He wore the black armor and robes of the Sith, and a hook-handled lightsaber hung at his side. Though he had never met the man before, Lord Kaan had heard enough about him to know exactly who he was. "Darth Bane!" he exclaimed. He cast a quick glance in Githany's direction, wondering if she had betrayed him. From the expression on her face, it was obvious she was just as surprised as he was to see their visitor alive and well. We thought you were dead," he began uncertainly. "How did—" "I'm tired," Bane interrupted. "Do you mind if I sit?" "Of course," Kaan quickly agreed. "Anything for a brother." The big man sneered as he settled into one of the nearby chairs. "Thank you, brother." There was something in his tone that put Kaan's guard up. What was he doing here? Did he know that Githany had tried to poison him? Did he know Kaan had sent her? "Please, continue with your strategy," Bane urged with a casual wave of his hand. Kaan's hackles rose. It was as if he was being given permission to continue, as if Bane was the one in charge. Gritting his teeth, he looked down at the map again and resumed where he'd left off. "As I was saying, the Jedi are hiding in the forests. We can flush them out if we split our numbers. If we deploy our flyers, we can flank their southern lines." "Ah!" Bane spat out, slapping his open palm down hard on the table. "Deploying flyers and flanking armies," he mocked, rising to his feet and thrusting an accusing finger at Kaan. "You're thinking like a dirt general, not a Sith Lord." A heavy silence had fallen across the room. Even Kaan was left speechless. He could feel all eyes on him, watching intently to see what would happen next. Bane stepped in close, his face just centimeters from Kaan's own. "How did you ever find the guts to poison me?" he asked, in a low, menacing whisper. That wasn't me," Kaan stammered as Bane turned his back on him. "Don't apologize for using cunning and trickery," the big man admonished, moving over to the strategy table. "I admire you for it. We are Sith, the servants of the dark side," he continued, bending down to study the troop positions and tactical layout spread out before him. "Now look at this map and think like a Sith. Don't just fight in the forest. Destroy the forest." It was Githany who finally broke the ensuing silence, asking the question on everyone's mind. "And just how do you propose we do that?" Bane turned back to them with an evil grin. "I can show you." Kaan, Githany, and the rest of the Dark Lords had gathered atop a barren plateau overlooking the vast forests where Hoth and his army were hiding. They had come on their flyers, short-range, single-person, airborne vehicles front-mounted with heavy blaster guns. The flyers were parked at the edge of the plateau, 50 meters away from where the Sith sat in a loose circle. The ritual had begun. They were communing with the Force, all of them slipping into a meditative trance as one. Their minds drifted deeper and deeper into the well of power contained within each individual, drawing on their strength and combining it through a single conduit. Bane stood in the center of the circle, urging them on. Touch the dark side. The dark side is one, indivisible. The night sky filled with dark clouds and a fierce wind swirled across the plateau, tearing at the cloaks and capes of the Sith. The air shook with the thunder and crackle of a mounting electrical storm. Bolts of blue-white lightning arced through the air, and the temperature suddenly dropped. Give yourself over to the dark side. Let it surround you, engulf you, devour you. The Brotherhood slipped deeper into the collective trance, barely even aware of the storm now raging about their physical selves. Bane stood at the eye of the storm, drawing the bolts of lightning into himself, feeding on them. He felt his strength surge as he channeled and focused the dark side from the others. This is how it should be. All the power of the Brotherhood in one body. The only way to unleash the full potential of the dark side. Do you feel invincible? Invulnerable? Immortal? He had to shout to be heard above the howling wind and thunder. A web of lightning spiraled out from his body, connecting him to each of the other Sith. He shivered, then suddenly went stiff, arms spread out at his sides. Slowly, his rigid body began to rise into the air. "Can you feel it?" he screamed, feeling as if the raw power of the Force roaring through him might rip his very flesh asunder. "Are you ready to kill a world?" The storm rolled down from the plateau and rumbled across the forest. Hundreds of forks of searing lightning shot down from the sky, and the forest erupted. Trees burst into flames, the blaze racing through the branches and spreading out in all directions. The underbrush smoldered, smoked, and ignited, and a wall of fire swept across the planet's surface. The inferno consumed everything in its path. Heat and fire. There was nothing else in Bane's world. It was as if he had become the storm itself. He could see the world before him, swallowed up in red and orange and reduced in seconds to ash and embers by the unchained fury of the dark side. It was glorious. And then suddenly it was gone. There was a jarring thump as his body dropped from where it had been hovering 5 meters above the ground. For several seconds, he was completely disoriented, unable to figure out what happened. Then he understood. The connection had been broken. He rose to his feet slowly, uncertain of his balance. All around him were the forms of the Sith, no longer kneeling in meditation, but collapsed or rolling on the ground, their minds reeling from the sudden end to the joining ritual. One by one, they also regained their composure and stood, most looking as confused as Bane had been only seconds before. Then he noticed Lord Kaan standing off to the side, over by the flyers. "What happened?" Bane demanded angrily. "Why did you stop?" "Your plan worked," Kaan replied curtly. "The forest is destroyed, the Jedi have fled to open ground. They are exposed, vulnerable. Now we go to finish them off.